did you know that the ancient Egyptians used to hand quilt their clothes? I know! So if you want to learn to hand quilt, you are in very, very good company. Now, in this video, I'm going to teach you what it is, how you're going to get started with it, and the equipment that you need. So, who am I? I am Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You are very welcome. Let's switch camera and get to learn this amazing, creative, and very relaxing hobby. Let's start by talking about what hand quilting is, because quilting is the same functionality as machine quilting and hand quilting, but hand quilting is always going to be slower, it's more rhythmic, and you can do it to relax in front of the TV. You don't have to sit at your sewing table or anywhere. So it's a really portable technique to use. Now, quilting has three functions. I don't know if you knew about this, but let me talk about these very quickly before we get into what you need. So the three functions are, there's a functionality bit of holding together the three layers of your quilt sandwich. So we need that to happen, the quilt top, your wadding or your batting and your backing layer there. Then secondly, the stitch lines create air pockets in between them. So if I had a stitch line here and a stitch line there, you'd have a little air pocket created in between that. And those air pockets over an entire quilt or a jacket or whatever create little pockets of warmth. And when you get the combination of all of that warmth, then you've got a nice warm finished garment or a nice warm quilt to go on your bed or whatever it is you need. So we need those air pockets to give us the warmth and the cuddly ability, which I'm making a new word. And then the third thing is it's decorative. So just like the ancient Egyptians did, then we can have any decorations that we want. And there are no rules with the decorations, so you can be as wild as you like. That said, in a future video, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 quilting designs that as a beginner that you could easily do and get started with. But really, you can go wild and be creative. So that's the functionality, if you like, of quilting. The history of it goes back, as I said, to thousands of years to ancient Egyptians. But another interesting little fact before we get on to what we need is that, did you know that in medieval times, the men, and it was men in those days, who went off to war, wore quilted jackets underneath their armour. And that kept them warm and I guess stopped the metal of the armour to rub them. But they had to buy their own armour. So if the king of the time called up the men to go into war, they had to buy their own armour. And if they couldn't afford their own armour, then they just wore their quilted jackets. So there you go. I'm not sure a quilted jacket is ever going to keep an arrow or whatever is going on, a cannonball, at bay. So a little interesting fact. Now, let's talk about what you need to get started with hand quilting, because there's just a couple of things that you might want to get hold of. Now, some people do hand quilt with a hoop. I don't, personally. I prefer to hold my fabric. So the hoop is just like a standard embroidery hoop that you might get for cross stitching or embroidery. You can get bigger stands as well, depending on how big your quilt is. That's entirely up to you, and a process that you might want to experiment with and try. If you are an embroiderer or a cross stitcher, you might be comfortable doing that. I'm not necessarily. I do cross stitch, but I don't necessarily like a hoop. Sometimes I do, but for small pieces I don't. But I think for quilts, when I've hand quilted, I actually prefer to keep it loose. So you can use a hoop or you're not. There are no rules about that. That's what you're comfortable with, so experiment. What you do need is betweens or quilting needles. Let me just show that up. The brand doesn't necessarily matter, but what you're looking for is betweens needles here. Now, betweens needles are a bit shorter and a bit sturdier than normal needles. So if I get this out, which I have no hope of ever getting it back in again, these are, say, shorter, they're stronger, and they're sturdier than your standard sharps needles. Now, sharps needles are your regular sewing needles, okay? But your betweens needles, they're much stronger. So if you did this to a a normal regular needle, a sharps needle, it will probably bend a little bit, but your betweens needles don't. So when we're doing our quilting, they're there to really be able to get between the layers, to get through the layers or between the layers, but also your hand doesn't get quite so tired because you're not having a needle that's going to bend all the time. So they're shorter and sturdier, so they're a bit better for what we want. So they're designed to do the job. Now, if you look at here, we've got some bigger needles and we've got some smaller needles. So they range from a size 3 up to, we've got a size 9. You can get a little bit bigger as well. But when you're starting out with hand quilting, start with a bigger needle. So that's a size 9 that I've got in the middle. And you can tell here because at the top of my needle packet, it says numbers 3 to 9. So on any of your needles packet, it doesn't matter what type of hand sewing needles you've got, you will get a sizing going on from whatever that says. So the bigger the number, the bigger the needle. And obviously the smaller the number, the smaller the needle. You had that, didn't you? You were there with me. So we're going to start with the number 9, which is the bigger needle. That's far easier to get going with. But as you get more confident and you've got more experience and more practice, then experiment with the smaller needles because you'll get smaller stitches with that. Okay, so we've got needles, we need that. Now, I can't stitch anything without a thimble, so you can get yourself a normal thimble if you like dealing with those. I think thimbles are really personal choice. I cannot stand wearing a standard thimble. You know, the metal ones that slip over your finger. I cannot stitch with those at all. Now these days you can get metal ones, I've seen wooden ones, you can get silicone ones. I don't like any of those at all. What I do like are these. So, oh, by the way, what is this, you're asking? This is a lipstick needle holder, which is magnetic, and these are all my regular needles. And they really hold it. So if I hold it upside down, my needles don't fall out. So if you see one of these at a show or in your local quilt shop or sewing shop, grab one because they're really useful. So it's a little lipstick. It's not a lipstick holder, but it's a lipstick needle holder. So I keep my, my thimble or my thimble pad just stuck on top because these can be reused. So I put these just where I push with my finger and I push the needle, so that's where the needle goes in, and they're made of leather, and however hard you push you can't feel it. Now they're looking like this, and by the way, if anybody's watching, this is not a sponsored post at all. I'm not getting paid in any way, shape or form for recommending you these. This is just my personal recommendation. So they're called Colonial Thimble Pads. You can get them very easily on Amazon, possibly your local quilt shop. It depends if they stock them. And they come on little non-stick pads like that, and they stick on the non-stick pads. So they stick on here, and then you peel one off and you stick it on, but they last for ages. And basically when it started to lose its stickiness, then time to get another one. My top tip is, though, you forget that they're on, so don't go to the loo with them on because you will forget and then you'll lose it. so you can reuse those. So if you don't like the thimbles that go over your finger, these are definitely the way forward. And then you need some thread, of course. I can't speak. So you can use your standard machine quilting thread. Now, quilting thread, you can use any thread really. So your quilting thread is a bit thicker than your standard piecing thread. So that means it will just show up a little bit more on your quilt, and that's the same when you're machine quilting as well. If you want to quilt with a thinner thread, go for it. So again, this is personal choice about the design and the look that you want, but I tend to go with this. This is a 30 weight thread. These are the Gutermann ones, and it will tell you on here what weight of thread it is. If you're confused about the weights of thread, I've got a video which I'll link up in the description below for you that you can go and check that out. There is also Gutermann quilting thread. Now do not get confused with this. So these are the quilting cottons, and if you look, this is a sort of pinky beige reel and it says quilting. Now this is hand quilting thread. So you can absolutely use it for hand quilting thread. It is coated in a little bit of a wax, so it won't harm your quilt at all, but it does make the thread, the quilting aspect, it will slide through your quilt sandwich much, not much easier, but it will just go smoother perhaps. But you don't ever want to put this in your machine. So no matter what it says on here, even though it says quilting on here, it is only for hand quilting, not for your machine. So for your machine, you want to be using these threads here that are on a grey spool, and this is Gutermann, so the colours of the spool will vary, but just check the thread that you're getting is meant for a machine, not just for hand quilting. That's for your machine. We're talking about hand quilting here, so I could use these. I'm actually going to use this dark machine quilting thread here just for this exercise, but as I said, for hand quilting you've got the choice of either your quilting cottons when it says quilting on the bottom, which is the wax coated, or the machine quilting cotton, but for your machines only use that one. Okay, I think I've gone on about that enough, haven't I? Okay, so those are your tools. You've got your threads, so thicker, they're strong enough to go through your layers, so that's good. We've got our betweens needles, or our quilting needles. We've got our thimble, whatever you like. I've got thimble pads and have a pair of scissors in mind. So if you've got all that going on, let's just change over and we'll get on to how we get started and how we actually do our quilting. I've got my block at the ready. I've got my thimble pad on, ready to go. I've got my needle threaded up. What I need to do first of all is put a knot into the end. And then I'm going to talk to you about where to start. So to put a knot in the end, you lick your finger, you wrap your end of your thread over your finger. Let's bring that right up to the camera so you can see. And I'm going to pinch that thread in between my finger and thumb. Then I'm going to wrap my thread round slowly, okay? And then I'm going to roll my finger and thumb so that my little knot comes off. And I'm doing it too slow. So it's not quite going. It's never going to work on camera, is it? So lick my finger, wrap the thread around, pinch it between finger and thumb, wrap it round and roll it off. And you should get a bit of a knot beginning, but what you do is you pinch it between your middle finger and thumb and slide down towards the end, and you'll get a little knot. And if I give it a pull, we'll end up with a knot. Now don't worry, because you're not going to see that knot at all. It will disappear. That's our next job. Okay, so let's just tighten up. There we go. So there's a nice knot that I've just unraveled. It's going well, this. Let's do it again. There we go. We're done. It's just to prove that these things happen to me too. There we go. Can we see? We've got a perfect knot on the end. I'm taking that and I'm living with it. Right. So I'm going to park my needle for a moment because we need to talk about where to start. Now, normally with quilts, and the rule with quilts on the whole, and that's the same whether you're machine quilting or hand quilting, is you start in the middle and you work out. And that is because if I started on the outside and worked in, look what happens. And I'm going to exaggerate this, but if I come from the outside and go in, oops, it's not going to work now, is it? We're going to get a ruck in the middle. We're going to get a ruckle, or we're going to get little creases or little pleats or something akin to that. We don't want that. What we want, if we start in the middle, all of those little creases and tucks will all fall off the edge. Kind of. Just go with it. They're going to fall off the edge. We can hoover them up later. But if we start in the middle, all of those wrinkles go out to the outside. You don't get any of that sort of bulky, wrinkly bit in the middle. You don't want that at all. Not a great look. If it's the look you're after, go for it, but otherwise start in the middle, go out. Now, just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to start over here so that you can see. So this disappearing four patch, if I started here, you're unlikely to see what I'm doing. So I'd like to be clear. So I'm just going to start on this block, this little section here, so that you can see. So this is definitely a case of, remember when your mum said, do as I say and not as I do. This is one of those times. I'm going to start here. I want you to start here. All right. So we're going to start by taking our knot, and we have to start a little bit away from where we want to start, because we want to bury the knot and then we want to lock our thread into place. So if I think I want to start here, for example, or let's say here, because I want to stitch along there, I'm actually going to start over here. So let's bring this up to camera a little bit so you can see. So if I want to start my stitching there, I'm probably going to hide my knot over here somewhere. So I'm going to start by poking my needle into the fabric over here, and it's in between the layers. So if I turn it over, you won't be able to see it on the backing here. I'm going to just bring my needle back up again. It doesn't matter where, we're just a little bit away from where we're starting. I guess that's just over 1/4 of an inch. It's not quite 1/2 an inch. What we're trying to do is bury the knot and lock our thread. So I'm pushing that in and I'm going to gently pull. Okay, so you can see that there's a little hole here where the knot has come out, went into, sorry, but that will close up, so don't worry about that. But what I'm going to do now is just come back on myself very slightly. There's probably 2 threads of my fabric there. All I'm going to do is just lock that stitch into place. In reality, I'd probably do it far closer to the seam where it will hide, but I'm just trying to show you what to do. If I try and get it all neat and tidy, then you probably won't quite see what I'm doing. So I'll come back on myself as a little lock stitch, and then what I'm doing is traveling along underneath between the layers, and I'm coming up where I want to start. Okay, so can you see that I've come, there is the thread which has come out. So this is so tiny. There's the thread that's come out. I'm going as if I'm doing a back stitch, so the needle is going over to my right by about 3 little threads of my fabric, and then it's traveling underneath in between the layers. Again, if I turn it over, you can't see the needle on this side here. It's traveling underneath, and then I can bring that up, and that will be my starting position. And you can't see that little lock stitch really, it's now disappeared into the fabric. Okay, so that's where I'm starting in this particular instance, but you want to come up where you're starting. And this is where these betweens needles come into their own. So having got to that place, what we are doing is a basic running stitch. So if I show you a single stitch, you know how to do a running stitch, but let me just show you. So we're going down through our fabric. So this time we do want to come out at our backing, at the back here. We want to see our needle. And then we're going to come back up again. So I'm going to push with my finger on the other side. Let's turn that over. So I'm pushing with my needle, pushing with my needle on this side to bring it back up again. And I will make a running stitch here. And then I would repeat the process. Okay, but bear with, don't switch off yet, because this is not the official technique of hand quilting. You can do this if you like. You can do single stitches. Look, there are no rules with this. I'm teaching you the really simple steps, and then you can practice and go on. So let's just repeat that. I'm going down through all of my fabric. I'm going to push up. So there's my needle on the other side. I'm pushing up with my finger. Try not to poke yourself like I've just done. I'm pushing up with my finger on the underside, and I'm going to push it through, and I've got a running stitch. Now, this is probably not our perfect hand quilting stitching that we're after, but this is to demonstrate that you're creating a running stitch. What we are actually doing with hand quilting, I'm going to go off in this direction, and do you know what I'm going to do is, when I finish, I'm going to unpick all of this and do it all again beautifully. So I'm going to go off in this direction to show you. So with hand quilting, we do a rocking stitch. What do I mean by that? It means it's rocking the needle, not rocking the stitches. We want an even line of stitches that are equally spaced and equal in length. Now when you start, you're not going to get that unless you are a hand embroiderer and you know exactly how to do that. But if you're new to hand quilting, that may take a little bit of time to get used to. So don't worry about this. Start on a small project and practice. You're not going to get it overnight if you're new to this. It's an acquired skill and it's a practice skill. So don't sweat it if your stitches are all over the place. Look, there's a thing called big stitching, and that's literally what it says on the tin. You can do big stitches, so don't think they have to be tiny if you don't want to be tiny. I've lived my entire life trying to be tiny. I tell you, it hasn't worked quite yet. So my rocking, I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to poke it in where I want my stitch to be. So it's going to be however long that is, which is about 1/4 of an inch, just under 1/4 of an inch, I think. Then what I'm going to do is, using my finger on the other side and using my thumb to help me, I am going to rock. I'm going to do this slowly so you can see. I'm going to rock my needle up and down, using my fingers and thumbs to help me, so that I can get even little stitches as I go along. Okay, don't worry, I will do this again. So it's poke up, come down, poke up. So can you see that rocking movement is what we're after? I'm going to poke that through. That's where these come really into their own. And as I pull it through, you'll end up with a very wobbly stitching line. I'll tell you how to get straight in a minute. But that's what we're after, relatively equal stitches which are at an even space apart. But as I said, when you're starting, don't worry if they're a bit uneven. Just think of it as unique. All right, I'm all for uniqueness. Now, how to get straight is, if you look in your fabric, let's see if I can show you. I'm not quite sure if I can very much, but in your fabric you will find that there's the warp and the weft threads. You will see the threads going across, and I found that you can utilize those to give yourself a little guide. Now I can't actually do it standing back. I'm currently sitting about, or my head is about 1.5 feet away from my block, so I can't really see what I'm doing. But if you follow, let's see if I can bring it up a little bit. If I follow the threads in the fabric as I'm going along, I should hopefully, can you see I'm just rock. I should hopefully get a straight line. We'll see. In my defence, I've got all sorts of things in the way. I mean, it's sort of straight, isn't it? You get the idea. There's a lot straighter when you don't have a camera in the way and you haven't got lights and you haven't got leads and everywhere. But there's a little tip that if you can see the grain line of the thread, follow that. If you want to use a marker, you can use that too. For goodness sake, do not use the heat transfer markers or the friction markers. I know people say to use them, but please don't. And the reason why is because although they look like they disappear, they actually don't. So you can, on some fabrics, you can still see a mark left on the thread. And if your quilt gets cold, or very cold, then that mark comes back again. So it disappears with heat, but it comes back. Now the manufacturers of the friction pens do say that they are designed for paper, not fabric. So there's probably a lesson in that, and they don't advise using it on fabric. There are plenty of markers around that you can use. Probably something like tailor's chalk. It would be the good thing to do on here. They are designed for fabric and you can follow a line along and then you can brush it away afterwards. Be careful on some of the marker pens though, because I will do a video on this, I think, because it's really important. Some of the pencils that you get, the marker pencils, actually have a wax in them, and you're not going to get that out of the quilt top of your fabric, your quilt top. I'll get my words in the right order. But a standard tailor's chalk will just give you enough that you can draw yourself a line and you can follow that line along, because that's probably the most difficult thing, is getting in the straight lines. Or look, You and I can decide that we don't like straight lines and we want to go in curves and all over the place. Do that, and then it doesn't really matter, does it? But if you want straight lines, follow the grain line or use tailor's chalk. If you want to have a curly whirly line, you can go for it and go any which way you want. So I'll do a couple of stitches there, and I'm going for nice big stitches because that's the look I want. I mean, honestly, you do not have to follow rules, you don't. This is you being creative. Remember what I said about hand stitching or hand quilting, any quilting being decorative. So be decorative and make it unique. You know, you don't, if you look at artists and painters, they don't all follow exactly the same brush strokes for everybody. It's all personal, isn't it? So you want to be personal to you and play and do whatever you like. So I'm just doing single stitches at the moment to come round. Okay, so I've got a little wobbly line and we've got a curve, and then maybe I want to come back here. So that's when I might decide that I'm going to do some of this rocking again. It's really the rocking that when people ask about hand quilting, that's what they're after. Can you see we've got a little shape taking place? I've no idea what I'm doing, by the way. I am just making this up as I go along. And I would say with quilting, whether you're machine or hand quilting, that you do want to have a think about your design beforehand. There we go. Look at that. We've got, what's that? We've got a pond with a little pathway, a little stream. Okay, so that is hand quilting at its simplest. It is a running stitch. You can be as small or as big as you like. Obviously, as you get practice, the smaller needles will give you the smaller stitches. That's the same with any kind of stitching. But for starting with, you start with the bigger needles and just aim to get evenly spaced and even lengths of stitches, and that should help with your design. All right, so the trick is to get started, start on some practice. Like all quilting, start on a practice piece, just get the rhythm of it. Don't worry about all the fancy people who can do this rocking motion really quick. If you look at some of the Japanese quilters, they are truly amazing at how fast they can go. We're not trying to do that. We're trying to have this as a pleasurable hobby for us, and that's what I want you to do, is to get the joy and the relaxation out of it. I don't want you to stress yourself because you can't get teeny stitches. If you can't get teeny stitches, do big stitch quilting. It is a thing, and even if it wasn't a thing, we'll invent it as a thing. All right, so practice and practice and practice. All right, so those are the designs. Think about your designs beforehand. You don't have to do anything fancy. As I said in a future video, oh, by the way, if you're wondering how to finish, I've got that coming up in a second. But in a future video, probably next week's video, I will give you 3 different designs that you can do as a beginner that are really effective. So if it's not linked up below and on the end of this video right now, then just wait a week and that'll appear as if by magic. But if you're watching this in a few weeks' time and you're like, well, it's there, what's she talking about? It's because this is now a little bit older. Anyway, that's fine, it's still current. All right, so start in the middle. Plan your designs first. Start in the middle. Bury your thread. You're not a little away from your started. Do a little tiny back stitch to lock it, and then come up where you want, and then you do your quilting. So how to finish then? So let me stop this and go on to a new section, and I'll show you how to finish. Okay, finishing then. So finishing hand quilting is not dissimilar to finishing on machine quilting, which is we make a knot and we bury the knot and we bury the tail ends within the middle of our quilt. All right, so far we've got our design on the back, which is whatever we have decided it to be. But now we want to create a little knot. And by the way, if you don't know how to finish machine quilting, then I've got a video which I'll link up below, and I'll stick it as the end card on the end of this video, so you can click through and go and have a check of that. It also does cover hand quilting, but I will do it here as well. So we've decided where we want to finish. What we do need to do is go a little bit away from the end of our design. So I've just given myself another stitch there to finish off my design, and I'm moving my needle away to somewhere else. All right. Then what we are going to do is wrap our thread around our needle a couple of times. Okay, if I can do this, I'm quite a long way away from my needle, which is quite difficult from where I am. So I've wrapped the thread round the needle there. This is a little bit like making French knots in cross stitch. I'm going to hold this thread and then without letting it slide off, I'm going to get into the fabric back where I came from, and I'm sliding back in between those layers again. So let's keep that thread taut there. So we want the knot here. I'm in between the layers, so you can't see my needle on the other side again. And as I pull through, that'll turn, see, I'm holding on to my thread. Can you see? I'm not letting that go. I'm keeping it quite taut underneath my thumbnail. And as I pull it taut, that knot will then disappear underneath the fabric in between the layers there. Sometimes that goes really easily like that did then. Other you might have to give it a little tug. It just depends where you've landed. All right. And then when I've got that knot, then I'm going to show you again. But when I've got that knot, I'd snip that and let the tail slide back into the layers just like you do on machine quilting. So let's do this again. Okay, so I've come away from my stitching. I'll wrap round the needle 2 or 3 times. How many times was that? Were you counting? Because I wasn't. We pull it taut. I'm all fingers and thumbs. I haven't got enough hands to do this. Okay, so I've wrapped round 3 times. Let's just bring it up. There we go. I've wrapped round 3 times there. Okay. And I'm poking it back into the fabric, trying to keep, you need basically 3 hands to do this. I think this is what I'm trying to say. And we bring it back just next to where we came up. Okay. So remember, I brought my stitch up, my needle up, I wrap round 3 times and I'm going down literally just next to it. Okay, so I came up just underneath there. I'm sliding my needle through. I'm keeping, I have to lay this down to do this. I'm keeping that knot taut against the needle. All right, just there. And as I poke that through, and we want to keep that knot, and as I pull it through, that'll knot, and then that will disappear underneath the fabric. So I was just doing that because it looked like something was on my fabric and it's actually on my screen, so that doesn't really help, does it? Okay, so my knot will disappear underneath and I can sort of just feel it there, and when I am happy, I would snip my loose thread off and the tail would disappear back into the layers again. So it's a pretty similar exercise to when you do machine quilting as well. But as I said, I've got a longer video on finishing that, and because it was a smaller piece, I could handle it all and it's much closer to the camera, so I'll link that up as well. So all these videos I've now got to remember to link up for you so that you can go and see. So that is hand quilting. So my advice really is to start small and practice. Don't expect to be perfect straight away, because none of us are at all. As I said, go for big stitches if you want to do big stitches, and you can't do small stitches. It doesn't really matter. It's a creative process. As long as you are holding your 3 layers together and you're creating some little pockets of air, then you're pretty much good to go and you can do what you like. But have a think about what design you want, but you don't need to follow any particular rules. Okay, so that's it. If you want to check out my video on hand piecing because you want to go wild on hand piece and hand quilt, there's a video coming up that you can check that out, which should be on your screen about now. This entire screen is going to be covered with videos for you to go and check out, but I'll put them all down below in the description so you can go and check that out. Okay. And I think that's probably it. So I hope that has helped you. If it has, please don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell. And I will love you and leave you for now and see you next time. Bye.